Today, we're going to do a quick recap where we're going to talk about the steps that we discussed last week about building an effective ethics program, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then I'm going to do a little bit actually about what some of the kinds of things that the PNC person who was going to speak today was going to talk about. Again, she had a family emergency. I'm really sorry that we're not going to have her as a guest speaker. Just selfishly, I was really looking forward to hearing what she had to say in just half an hour of sort of like preparation and discussion and sort of get to know each other. Just a phone call. She was beyond fascinating and super interesting. So I will hopefully be able to at least get her in the fall. I'm probably going to continue to double dip and count these as Beta Gamma Sigma events as well. So hopefully we'll be a little better about pushing that out via social media. Maybe you'll see that next fall and you can come in and dip in. But so we're going to recap last week, building an effective ethics program, and then we're going to discuss measurement tools. There are a few different ways of looking at how you measure something, like whether how a company is doing CSR. Now, these are much broader, more ambitious measurement tools or ways of looking at the ways that a company meets goals above and beyond simply accounting for financial profits. Then I want to, when we actually start talking about building actual ethics audits, SHRM has 6 steps to highly effective ethics audits, and some of what an actual audit starts to lean into is actually social science research design. Now at that point, you're talking about literally my specialty, something the kind of stuff that I'm super duper extra interested in and really highly trained in. So then we'll briefly dip into how to design good surveys and instruments, surveys and interviews. So we'll have a very, very brief, basically lecture on social science research methodology. And then I'm going to prep you for the discussion on Wednesday. So we're not going to get into that obviously today. We'll just have enough time for the lecture, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing on Wednesday, time permitting. So first, a quick recap from Star Willis Day about the 5 key elements of implementing an effective ethics program. They are: 1, you need clearly defined and communicated values and expectations. 2, you need leadership commitment. This one is really huge. The folks at the top of the org chart really got to buy into this and live it and talk about it. You're going to need guidance and concerns reporting. Reporting and resolution processes for any guidance, any concerns, any feedback that employees have. There's got to be a means of getting that back into the machinery of company leadership, so that you can implement those changes before they become a problem. 4, you're going to do relevant annual training. Has to be relevant, has to be annual. 5, you're going to have program effectiveness measurements. And so that's some of what we're going to talk about next. Unsubtle hint, by the way, when a professor says something in 2 consecutive lectures, they consider that important, and you know what professors do with information that they consider to be important. Unsubtle hint. So let's talk about our measurement tools. Now I'm going to cover 3. The book also mentions Six Sigma, which is like, that's great for manufacturing quality and some other applications, but it's much more of just a traditional non-CSR business measurement system. It's not really the type of CSR focused system that we're looking at. So I'm going to look at the 3 a little bit more specifically that are CSR or business ethics focused. And the paradigm here is how do we look at the ways that a company is doing well? How do we look at the ways that the company is doing well not only in terms of making profit for itself and earning value for its shareholders, but also doing well for other stakeholders, for the environment, et cetera. So how do we look at measuring these other sorts of things? Certainly by accounting 1 and 2, you will have all learned at least the basics of how to measure the profits for the company, and that's in hand. Like, I'm going to assume most of you have that. But how do we measure this other stuff? And then how do we weigh it against, how do we counterbalance it against the sort of the traditional accounting sorts of questions? That's what this stuff is looking for. The first one is the balanced scorecard. The first one is the balanced scorecard. Now, here is where our guest speaker was going to be a rock star and make a really interesting lecture. And I'm going to bring in some of what she was going to talk about anyway by looking at PNC, because they use what's called a balance. They use the way they do this is with a balanced scorecard. And what they do is they just go through, and I've got a URL here. I'm going to pull up the website that shows here in just a sec. What they do is they just say, okay, well, what does corporate social responsibility mean to us? What are our goals? And then how do we measure whether or not we're meeting those goals? Now, the great thing about a balanced scorecard is that you can focus in on specific areas that are important to your company. So if you are, for instance, if you are if you run a legal firm, right? And you can talk about your environmental impact as a legal firm, but it's going to be, and the difference between having a LEED certified building and a traditional, like, super, energy inefficient building, and traveling sort of as much as you could possibly want to travel versus as little as you can get away with, and other sorts of things that you could do as a law firm. I mean, you probably want to put environmental impact in your scorecard, but that's not going to be that big of an impact. Certainly not compared to, so last semester, my guest speaker was the Jennifer Leitch from CBRE, which is a real estate services firm. And so between CBRE themselves and their clients who depend on CBRE for a lot of their advice, that is an environmental impact we're talking about, right? You're talking about, like, millions upon millions of square feet of commercial real estate, and how you build that, how you maintain it, how you heat and cool it, where you put it. Those are major social and environmental impacts. They're much, much bigger than something that even a pretty big law firm by themselves is going to be able to do. So whether the environmental impact matters and how you measure that and how much detail you measure it is going to vary. It's just one example of how you're going to vary the way that you create your scorecard based on what kind of firm it is that you're talking about. So the terrible thing about a balanced scorecard system is that nobody tells you what goes in there, and so you as a company have to figure out what goes in there. And so sometimes that's hard because you just have to figure that out, and it's going to take a lot of person hours to figure out what are our values, what are our priorities, what are we really going to emphasize in this scorecard, and that takes a lot of time. But there's also the problem of that sometimes you can just look for the stuff where you're already doing pretty well, that you've already really prioritized, and sort of try not to think about the areas that actually really do matter, or that you probably really should be looking at, but that aren't that your company is not doing that well on. And you can say, well, let's not put that in our scorecard. So there's also some room for a little bit of self-dilution here as well. And I obviously don't encourage that, but it's a delicate balance that you have to watch out for here. So this again, I said I was gonna pull up this website. Let's go ahead and do that and look at the way that PNC has done their balanced scorecard. Zoom in a little. Is that big enough? See that pretty well? Okay, so this is their 2018 scorecard. I'm not sure. I wonder if the pandemic was when they were going to update all the data from 2019, and then that's kind of slowed them down. I would like to ask the guest speaker about that if she were here. Thoughts to her family. I'm not sure. She wasn't specific about the crisis but it sounded serious, and so I hope everything's okay. So they've got these 4 areas here: bank, as well as they're bragging about the awards they've won, which are a lot. We'll get to that. Bank responsibly, deliver an exceptional customer experience, build a talent-focused culture, and strengthen our communities. Right. So two of these, develop an exceptional customer experience and build a talent focused culture. Those sound like just, management and marketing stuff, like just basic corporate stuff that is not a CSR issue or not a business ethics issue. But when you dig in there, you're going to see a lot of the places of overlap between sort of marketing and management and ethics CSR stuff. A lot of the places where that Venn diagram intersects that I've been talking about a lot, including unsurprisingly diversity and inclusion, and good treatment of stakeholders. So let's start with delivering an exceptional customer experience, right? So how many customers and prospects have they surveyed, right? 500,000 in 2016, a little more in 2017, 750,000 roughly in 2018. That's a big improvement in the number of folks who were surveyed. That's a lot of data brought in that should hopefully give you some feedback. And the more numbers you get, the bigger you get this number, the bigger you get this number, the more you can do with that data. So, if PNC has, 10,000 branches, right? And you're going to want 700 answers per branch if you can get it, so that you can say that within each branch, are folks who come at day versus during the day versus at night, or commercial big company versus small company versus individual clients. How are they responding? How do our high net worth people respond to this versus how do our sort of ordinary working and middle class folks respond to this? And you want to be able to do that by branch. You want to be able to do that by area, by region, et cetera. So the larger this number gets, the more you can finally break down the data. If this was 10,000 or 30,000, then maybe you've only got like 40 answers or 60 answers for some of your branches, and that's not going to be enough for you to know. I mean, you'll know overall. You can know overall how a branch is doing probably with 500-600 responses, but that's probably not a big enough number for you to really drill down and say, okay, how does this type of client or this type of client or this type of client, how do they feel about the services that we're providing? Average speed of an answer, 38 seconds. Then it's up to 74 seconds. I don't know what happened between 2016 and 17. Maybe they had some sort of call center issue that they're working on ameliorating here. This is an impressive number, though. How many of our client questions are answered on the first customer care call? 90%. That's pretty good. Total bankers who have been certified as women's business associates. So this is where you're starting to see a little bit more of a CSR stakeholder value flavor to this, right? Which is, we don't just want to provide, everyone who walks in the door with an excellent experience. We also want to be the kind of bank that specifically looks for people who historically have not been especially well served by our industry, and make sure that we're going above and beyond for them via certifying them as women's business associates being one such example, right? And then how many of them are using non-branch channels? That, again, a lot of the stuff is just marketing management stuff. It's not especially CSR focused, but this is where you start to see some of that emphasis come in. Build a talent focused culture too, right? Same thing, right? So here this is where we've got a lot of change in employee score. How much are employees viewing? How much is that improving over time? How much are our employees participating in our 401k? Again, I can't say this enough to you. The easiest bit of advice you should take away from your time at MSU Denver is, as soon as somebody puts a retirement match on the table, take your match. Take your match. It's free money. Get it. Go get it. And how many health savings account funds dollars are committed? HSA accounts actually aren't for everyone. I could get into that. So 27.8 million across a company that big isn't that big, and there's a reason for that. But the value of the pension benefits, that's a lot bigger. Percent of PNC employees who are members of employee business resource groups. So we didn't talk about ERGs, employee resource groups, but those are groups such as dedicated to the Asian Pacific Islander experience at your company, or the African American experience, or the Hispanic experience, or women, or the LGBTQIA community. Now those resource groups are not They're not exclusive. They're not a club where only like the African American, the Black and African American ERG doesn't mean that you have to be Black or African American to participate in that resource group. And in fact, it's actually really good for upper management to show up for those, even if they aren't members of that community, to show we are invested. Certainly in that case, if you're in that position, if you're a VP at a company and you're like, I want to sit in on an ERG and I'm not a member of that, that is a really good opportunity to listen. That is not a good opportunity to talk. Maybe ask some questions, right? Especially if you're in a, if they start talking about something where you're like, oh, this is kind of in my area of the firm. I could maybe help with that, but I'm not sure I really understand. Could I, I want to make sure I understand more. Could I ask a little bit more just to help with that? Or could I, is there someone here who'd be willing to sort of do a follow-up meeting with me to make sure that I'm trying to implement this well? But these are there's a lot of good literature in the diversity and inclusion research that shows that having ERGs and ERG participation and ERG support by upper management are all really highly correlated with a more inclusive workplace culture. And how many ERG chapters? So the word business here is a little atypical. We typically would say ERG, employee resource group, right? How many resource group chapters are there? 64, 68, 81. That's pretty good. And then when you do stuff like that, well, that's how you start getting stuff like more stuff like better retention rates by virtue of having a more inclusive environment, which shows that the number of shows when you have a diversity numbers going up over time, that tends to be a sign that you have an inclusive office. It doesn't mean that you do for sure, but it helps show that, right? So the number of people managers completing micro behaviors training, and so micro behaviors is a term you might not have heard. What they mean is sort of like the little so microaggressions probably is a term that you've heard, and I'm sure what they mean here is the micro behaviors it's just it's a less negative or destructive way, because it's the little things that we do that are good also contribute, as well as the little things that we do that are bad that help deteriorate people's work experience. I'm sure they train it both those ways. So they want 95% of people managers to complete that by 2019, and 16.3% of people managers overall have done so in 2018. So that's going to be a big ramp up for them. How many people how many people managers have completed unconscious bias training? They're up to 43.7%. So again, this is a huge ramp up from 8.7 to 43%, going up to 95. That's pretty big. How many people managers are racial and ethnic minorities? 18.8 to 20 to 21. What percentage of the workforce are racial and ethnic minorities? These numbers move a little bit slower. A number like this, a measure like this at a firm the size of PNC, that's going to steer like a cruise ship. So, you're going to really have to consistently pull on the wheel in one direction to make a move. And then, a big wave comes where just one manager doing something real publicly all of a sudden can sort of knock you off course real quick. So that's a hard balance to pull off, right? What percentage of their workforce is women? Now this is, and what percentage of people managers are women? 50%, 59.5, and 50%. Now here, I'm going to pick on them a little bit, and I would have liked to have done this as well with our guest speaker, even if she were here. These measuring this in these ways is in some ways a little bit of an illustration of the kind of problem of cherry picking that you can get when you develop a balanced scorecard for your own company, right? Which is to say, okay, sure, I want diversity. I want a racially and ethnically diverse group of people managing my people, right? And I want a gender diversity among people who are managing my people. That is true, but also, how diverse is your C-suite? How diverse is your executive team? How diverse is your board? That is not here is a concern. I do want to say that I think that's somewhere else, right? So
is C-suite just like a generic term for like CEO, CIO, CFO?
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah. Thank you, Cody. Somebody clarified that at the 2 o'clock on Wednesday, and I still forgot to do it for y'all. Yeah. So exactly, the chief executive, chief marketing, chief information, chief security officer, chief. Yeah. Chief. All of those chief officers at the top, above the VP level. Here we are. So, what percentage of women do we have among independent board directors? What percentage of racial and ethnic minorities do we have among independent board directors? And so that's, from 14% to 25% on the board. That's a big jump. That's pretty impressive, right? At least 30% of the board directors should be women. Maybe if I were them, I would push them, say, could we get that number higher with a few more years further in advance? What would that look like? We certainly have had enough years of women in the banking industry that there are enough women qualified to be on a board that I don't, we could perhaps push them in that direction a little bit. But again, okay, so we've got people managers and the board above the CEO, right? But in the middle, right, the CEO, the C-suite, and the upper management just below the C-suite, all your senior VPs or senior level leadership or wherever you draw that line. Like overall, what's their racial and ethnic diversity? What's their gender diversity? And that's a number that's not reported here. And I think that's maybe something they're a little bit less proud of. And maybe they're tracking that privately and also working on that. But I think that's not as good as if they were to just say, listen, this is an area of improvement. Here's a reachable goal, even if it's still not a fantastic number for a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. And so this is again an example of where setting a balanced scorecard for yourself gives you a little bit of an opportunity to cherry pick. Right. Here's a fun one where they're doing ESG. Remember, environmental, social, and governance, where they're doing basically CSR or business ethics, ESG due diligence on their clients, right? And so 23 new clients and 229 total existing clients, right? And this number going up over time, subjected to that ESG due diligence. Now, here's where I'd just like to ask more, like why, you have thousands and thousands of corporate clients, right? Like why are these firms being picked out for this? And is it just because you're just randomly picking some as an on-ramp to sort of build this program up more thoroughly? Or are there certain industries or other characteristics of firms where you're really more specifically interested in figuring out what their ESG situation is? I'm not sure, and so I think that would be really interesting to know. And then what are our CO2 emissions, energy consumption, total water consumption? And here's an area where they are just crushing it. It's home run after home run for them, right? So CO2 emissions, they're trying to get a 75% reduction from their 2009 baseline, 30% less, 42%, 48% less. That is in 3 years to, just like that. That's really quick. That's super impressive. And, energy consumption overall, this is including, because it's not specifically CO2, this is going to be harder to do because even with sustainable energy, right, you still want to draw even less against that as well, because you still, it's not, wind power and solar power are not resource free, right? You need, think about all the mining and chemicals that goes into making a solar panel. Think about all the mining and manufacturing and energy it takes to build and maintain a wind farm, right? So they're still not free. They're sustainable in the sense that once they're up and running, then they don't, we don't take as much, we take very little fossil fuels to keep them going, but, other than trucks to come out and service them and that sort of thing. But, total water consumption, trying to get a 50% reduction. They're already down 34% off their 2012 baseline. So this is really impressive stuff. This is really, here's where I unconditionally, like even the most cynical version of myself would be like, dude, okay, that's good. This is really nice. And then in the strengthening our communities area, this is another area where they do really well. Now, I will not try to do anything like justice to what our speaker was going to talk about here. But this Grow Up Great program that they have is, as a company, they have a huge philanthropic investment in the early childhood space, right? We're trying to get as much sort of like nutritional and educational and family support assistance to young children in need, because there's just so much evidence that the most cost effective way to intervene on a dollar for dollar basis in a child's life is the earlier the better, right? So if we can get, if we get them where they're getting the right nutrition before they can even walk and talk, if we're getting them the right understanding from parents for how to interact with children in a way that is not really, trying to mimic kindergarten for a 2-year-old, but sort of like, a lot of parents don't talk with their kids as much as other parents do. And so like, that's one area where it's like, no, really, talk to just everything you're doing, narrate what you're doing, because that helps them, build vocabulary very early. And then that sets them up for success later. So all of these and I don't know how many or which of these interventions that they specifically are going after. So again, I'm really not doing justice to them there, but I know that this is a huge investment that they have. And this is, they're paying employees to do 100,000 hours in a year worth of work in this space. That's huge, giving 77 million per year in space, in this space. And how many, 692,000 participants in the PNC financial education program, right? That's kind of some of the stuff that those of you who are finance majors and are going to go into like the CFP kind of direction, like providing those kinds of services to the community, right? The Community Reinvestment Act rating. I don't know the CRA that well. Micro lending to small businesses up and up, right? Small business lending up and up, right? And what percent of and here again, they're at least they're being honest that it's flat, right? What percent of our eligible spend is going to small, diverse, and disadvantaged owned business enterprises? And it's only, they're stuck at about 15%. And so how much of that is that they're not doing enough work there, and how much of that is just that they're just making a lot more loans to everyone, right? Maybe they're just growing a lot as a company, and so this space is growing. It's just not growing proportionately. And so then how do we account for that? But also, how do we maybe make sure that this grows a little bit more, even proportionally, even in a growing environment? So again, I would like to have had our guest speaker to ask some of these questions too. But. So when you do all of this, all of this stuff like this, I mean, this is really pretty good stuff. This is not, again, I think there are some areas where we could nitpick. I would be happy to, I'd be happy to ask those questions of a speaker, but for the most part, it would be like, this is cool stuff. This is a really neat story. And that's how you get stuff like, outstanding, the 100 most sustainable companies, just 100 America's most just companies, right? America's most responsible companies, right? 100% score on diverse, disability, equity, equality index, best places to work, right? Top 50 employers, right? Careers in the disabled. I'm surprised they don't have an accessibility metric up top in all those boxes, but maybe that's just because that's I don't know. I mean, it sounds like they're already doing pretty well there. How you measure accessibility across an entire company is an area that I'm not especially familiar with. But maybe that goes up there. Same with veterans access stuff. The same way that they do have some measures for doing right by women up top. So. Anyway, so that's a little bit of what one balanced scorecard for one company might look like. I'm really grateful that PNC got put on our radar for this, because once I looked into it, I was like, whoa, that's okay. Well, at least I know one company I can talk about pretty enthusiastically. So that's pretty nice. But again, the balanced scorecard is a little bit of a choose your own adventure way to do this. Another way the next one is a bit of a cliche, but it is also meaningful, and that's the triple. Oh, nope, not that one. The triple bottom line. So that's social, environmental, but also financial, right? So how do we do right by people? How do we do right by the planet and also make money as a firm? So this takes into account social, environmental, and financial impacts of all of the decisions made within an organization. And the idea behind triple bottom line is that it is an accounting system. Triple bottom line, in principle, is something that as a company you bring your ESG experts, your CSR experts, and your accounting team together, and your management team overall together, and you say, how do we include our environmental impact in our accounting? How do we include our environmental impact in our accounting? So how do we, think back to accounting 2010. How do we put how do we put a line for water pollution? How do we put a line for water use? How do we put a line for energy use? How do we put a line for non-renewable energy use? How do we put it, and then what is the cost of those how do we make an accountable cost for those in a way that recognizes the impact that those are having? In the best of worlds, companies would, and same thing with people, how we're impacting our neighborhood, how we're impacting all the places where we have plants, all the places where we have shops, all the, how do we put into account our tax strategy, right? Because companies have different tax strategies. And thus our impact on our federal, state, and local governments. Now, it's not, a lot of firms don't do this because this would be a really aggressive way to do triple bottom line accounting. But what I would like to see happen is for all firms to do triple bottom line accounting, and to try to do it in such a way that they account for all of their externalities. They account for all of their externalities and bring those within the accounting that they do and say, we own that, even if nobody is technically making them pay for it. Now, what do I mean by externalities? Well, if I weed my lawn versus if I just let the dandelions grow, right? That affects my lawn. It also affects my neighbor's lawns. Right? So when I look at how well I'm taking care of my lawn, if I'm getting out there ambitiously, I'm like, oh, that's the beginning of a dandelion, let's get it out, and do that consistently, then not only am I having a better effect on my lawn, I'm also not having a negative effect on my neighbor's lawns. And if I only wait until those dandelions are real big and huge, and then every month, which is not often enough for those of you who don't own a lawn yet, wait for every month, like, oh, it's been a month, it's been 3 months, let's go pull those now. Then, like, sure, every so often my lawn looks pretty good, but I'm also having a negative effect in terms of dandelions coming in at that house and this house. Right. And then the house 2 down, and the house 2 down, and the house 3 down, and the house 3 down. Right. And so those external effects, those effects that are external of my property, in some way also matter. Right. But do I account for those? And think about all of the different ways that firms have externalities that they're not being forced to pay for. Right. So if your workforce broadly qualifies for food stamps. If your workforce broadly qualifies for food stamps, then you're pushing some of the cost of paying for your employees off onto the taxpayers, right? You're creating an externality that you are not having to pay for. If you are compliant with EPA regulations about, say, groundwater pollution, but those regulations allow for a certain amount of groundwater pollution that has a negative effect on the quality of the water table, the quality, the value of the land around you, the value, the quality of the water downstream for other users. Right here in Colorado, we're fortunate that we tend to be upstream of almost everybody, right? But how are the folks in Kansas and Missouri affected by our water usage and our? I think that's the way the Platte goes, right? The how are the folks who are downhill from us, whichever states those are, how are they affected by your firm's decisions? Again, within or not within an EPA environmental regulation.
Professor,
Yes.
excuse me. I just text you privately about something. If you don't mind, take a look, please.
Sure. Did you do that in Teams?
No, right here on chat.
Oh, in chat. Okay. I'm not here. Let me pull it up. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that's so broadly speaking. Thank you. But for everyone, if you're welcome to come and go in class. I record my lectures, and so I will post them later. And so you can catch the rest of the recording later. So that's okay. Please travel safely. Thank you. The idea of an externality is an effect, positive or negative, that exceeds the impact that organization had, that exceeds the actual financial plus and minuses, like accounting 2010 style, that your organization is going to see. And mostly we talk about negative externalities, right? Like the groundwater pollution issue, like the mining. I mean, I'm reading a book right now. It's so hard. I can only read like 10 pages at a time because it's so heartbreaking. It's about the actual material and social impacts of artificial intelligence. And so much of it is based on, like, think about AI is not, like, the cloud is not magical. It's just someone else's computer. And I'm really oversimplifying, but like there are a lot of computers required that actually need a physical space to exist. And those computers require components, and those components require minerals, and those minerals require mining. And so the negative environmental impacts of artificial intelligence and cloud computing are really substantial when you account for the mining that goes into the machines that make this stuff happen, right? And this author says, and I don't, this is the first time I've ever heard this idea put forth, so I don't know that it's entirely true, but she says that mining would never be profitable if the people who mine had to pay for all of the effects that mining creates. That mining would never be profitable if the people who mine had to pay for all of the effects that mining creates. The book is by Kate Crawford, Crawford. It's called The Atlas of AI. A very, very important, very influential book. But it is very heartbreaking, very depressing. But very well written. And I'm kind of stuck in the mining section. It sounds very terrifying. Right. But there are also positive externalities. MSU Denver is a positive externality generating machine. CU Boulder, CSU, UNC, universities generally, colleges, community colleges are positive externality generating machines, right? Think about, like, I have made so much more money because of the 3 degrees that I've acquired than I would have made if I'd just gone to work out of high school, right? And yet and every year I send CSU like $50, right? So, like, out of all of that positive gain that I've seen in my life personally, from even if I'd stopped at a master's, which I got a bachelor's and a master's at CSU, even if I'd stopped there, I'd still be making much, much, much more money than I would have with just a high school degree. And maybe I'm still sending CSU, even if I send them $2,000 a year, which is a lot. Like, that's a please become the kind of donor who gives us $2,000 a year. I would love that. But the once you graduate and become successful, but the how much of that positive externality that CSU has generated, not only for me, but in terms of the broader social impact that I've had by using and applying all of this knowledge, how much did they get back from that? Like, Very little, very, very little. I mean, I make more money in the form of taxes as a Coloradan again now, and they get some of that very indirectly via the legislature, but almost none, almost none. MSU Denver too. We have such a pot. I mean, they went through and did the math, and they calculated that we have a $72 million impact every year on the Colorado economy, right? And how much of that are we getting back? Or was it 720 million? I don't know. It was a lot. It was like a lot. And how much of that are we getting back? Like very little. So if we could account in on the positive side for the positive externalities that we generate, that would be really nice. You know, if PNC could just sort of guarantee that like a certain percentage of all those really young kids that they're working with grow up and become, you know, tellers and managers and executives at PNC, right? Maybe they would capture some of the positive externalities that they're creating there. That's not really the point of what they're doing there. So anyway, so but the idea of an externality is something that exists outside of what you would normally account for as a firm. And the idea behind triple bottom line accounting is that we look at our social impacts, we look at our environmental impacts that we don't have to account for in a traditional sense, and we do account for those. We do fold those into our accounting system. How you quantify how you measure, and then how you put a dollar value on your potential negative environmental impacts. How you put a dollar value on, and then you know, even after you've measured, which is hard enough, any potential negative social effects you've had, that's very difficult to do. So, but in principle, that's what you're shooting for. There's a much more specific system that the book talks about called the Global Reporting Initiative. Now I've thrown the link so that you too can download their standards. It's a very complicated set of standards and norms for how to report them. GRA is not alone. There are a few others, NGOs around this. There are international standards boards as well that set up stuff like this for how to. And so this is something akin to the balanced scorecard, except that instead of choose your own adventure like PNC got to do, it's we tell you specifically what it is that you're measuring and how to measure it. So it's very detailed. Most of you will not be at a place where you really need a whole lot of the detail here, but broadly speaking, just know that there are groups out there like the GRI that have these sets of standards for ESG reporting, and that if your firm wants to be really ambitious and go in a direction like this, it'll take a lot of work, but you'll learn a lot about your firm and your social impact. So that's a very helpful exercise, I think. The College of Business has gone through something really similar, just in the context of are we a quality College of Business, and that's through our AACSB accreditation. Right? We don't just get to say, here's how AACSB accreditation, here's what that means to us. AACSB says, no, here's a set of standards, and here's a small book on just this standard, and here's a small book just on this standard, and here's how to report that, here's how to measure that, here's how to implement that. And then even within that, you're still negotiating and discussing with your peer visitation team, with your lead and the other visiting deans who are coming in to look at that. And so an accreditation system for we meet this very, very specific set of standards is very difficult to pull off in that context. And that's all with things that are much easier to measure than stuff like what's your environmental impact. So something like this is very difficult. But again, we going through the AACSB process with the College of Business, every time we do it, we learn a lot about ourselves by preparing every year to make sure that we've got all our standards documented. We continue to measure that stuff. We continue to learn and grow that way. And it's all very helpful stuff. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about audits, about ethics audits. The process of measuring how your firm is doing ethically in a specific set of contexts that are much more focused on do our people know our ethical systems, are our ethical rules being followed? Do people feel like they can report those sorts of things? And so SHRM, for those of you who've forgotten, is the Society for Human Resource Management. They're very helpful when it comes to documenting business ethics and CSR stuff. So let's look at what they say. Oh, darn it. Okay. I know you just saw them, but I only want you to see one of them at a time. Right. Number one, start with a detailed foundation. You have to start with a detailed foundation. An ethics audit is a comparison between actual employee behavior and the guidance for employee behavior provided in policies and procedures. Right? How are employees actually behaving? And then to measure that, you have to have a yardstick to measure that against. And so the first step is develop a good yardstick. The first step is develop a good yardstick, develop a detailed foundation. The more descriptive and specific ethics-related policies and procedures are, the easier it is to make these comparisons. A lot of the text I'm reading from is just specifically from the SHRM guidelines that explain this. I've got that text in here. I've got the URL for that in here in the notes. I'll post the PowerPoint. I'll post the video as well, but I'll post the PowerPoint. You can find all the stuff right in here. Number two is develop metrics. Ethics audits may not be as black and white as financial or operational audits, but they run more smoothly when tangible ethics measures are in place. Right? Consider adding ethics goals to annual performance reviews and where possible, tying compensation to ethical behavior. Right. So when you have tangible metrics in place, think about the PNC website that we just went through in detail, right? What percentage of employees have done the annual ethical training? That's a clear one. That's one you saw right in the PNC website. Their number was 100%. That's a number you should shoot for as a firm. Is you should shoot for a 100% participation from in your annual ethics trainings. Right? How else are you going to get there? Once you develop these metrics, right? Also think about do we tie executive compensation to these metrics, right? So diversity and inclusion numbers, right? So unless we have at least this percentage of racial and ethnic minorities in leadership positions, unless we have this percentage of women in the company or in leadership positions, unless we have this percentage of people saying that they feel like the workplace is inclusive on a standardized survey, then you don't get your bonus. Right. So whatever metrics you think you can make hard and fast, or you can say, I need this number, I need this percentage. If you tie that to executive compensation, once you've got these metrics, if you tie them to executive compensation, not as if by magic, but by the magic of incentives, right? Economists will tell you people tend to respond to incentives. Then you'll move a lot further along on these metrics. Then you want to create a cross-functional team. So do not, we've talked about this all semester. Do not outsource ethics. Ethics can't live in the HR department. Ethics has to live everywhere. Business ethics has to infuse the place. Similarly, when you're doing an ethics audit, you can't outsource that to HR either. Now, you definitely want an HR professional familiar with people in the business unit being audited, right? But you also want ethics and compliance managers if you have those. You want internal auditors, right? Surely you have a CMI or 5 on staff, certified management accountant. Right. So get those people in who are looking at a CPA even, or whoever is doing your internal audits. You also want legal in there, and really you probably also want some just management leadership types in there as well who don't have any of these other specialties. SHRM suggests that you audit efficiently. Audits frequently disrupt normal operations in business areas subjected to review. Before scheduling an audit, find out if internal audits or the finance team may be conducting reviews of the same area, right? If your internal audit team is looking for fraud, let's bring this together, you know? Once the audit has been scheduled, create a plan that spells out employees to be interviewed, information that requires review, and any processes that require observation. So you want to have a game plan before you go into it that takes into account what other audits and reviews are happening and leverages those, if that makes sense. And then if you have a good game plan in advance so that you can minimize disruption, get in, get out, not interview 50 people, 200 people, and then say, oh, we asked the wrong questions. Now we got to go back and ask people again. Like, no, let's get those questions right the first time. That sort of thinking ahead, planning ahead, and getting it done right correctly would be really nice. Look for other issues. Keep an eye out for other improvement opportunities and share those with relevant colleagues. Right. So, for example, ethical issues in a sales area may have revenue recognition implications from a financial reporting perspective. Or to think back to the hypothetical we did with Todd and Zara. Right. If your ethics audit turns that up, I mean, obviously you've got to say, well, Zara, we gotta. That's a problem. If she's still there when when an audit like this happens, you gotta okay, we've found somebody stealing from the till. That's not okay, right? But as the case study revealed, the other issues that highlighted is that we've got performance. Incentive issues, we've got pay issues, we've got compensation issues. Let's bring those to the table. Let's bring those to HR and say, listen, we're underpaying our frontline sales staff. We unintentionally wound up doing an experiment where we found out that with more money, with performance bonuses, this team was just crushing it. Our retention numbers went way up, our performance numbers went way up. Maybe Zara is interested in doing a little bit of consulting, like bring her back and sort of say, we're interested in having you walk us through what worked so well for that. So what are the other issues there? Because you're going to find some stuff that isn't necessarily an ethics and compliance issue, but that could be brought to the attention of another division. And then finally, respond consistently and communicate. Discipline ethics violations in complete accord with policies and procedures and the code of conduct every time, right? So you have to be consistent. Also, use ethics issues when possible as grist for lessons learned in ethics-related communications and training. So that's how to do a highly effective audit. Now let's talk about designing good surveys and interviews. Before we do this, people are complicated. And measuring people and understanding people is therefore a complicated endeavor. There are reasons that psychological theories and sociological theories and communication theories are they're like 15 parts with 30 subparts. Sometimes they're and in this context, this tends to happen unless this is the case, then this tends to happen. And even then it's only tends to happen. People are hard to measure. And so when it comes to designing surveys and designing interviews, it's important to remember that little changes matter. It's important to remember that measuring at all matters. Right, people are like I'm sure you've all heard Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? That there are certain parts of really small parts of the universe that you can either measure or that if they behave one way when they're being measured and a different way when they're not being measured. And I don't know how they know that when they're not measuring them. People are like that. People are absolutely like that. So if they think they're being monitored versus when they don't think they're being monitored, they behave differently. If you think, if they think they know what you want to hear, they will be really happy to tell you what you want to hear. And so you have to make sure that you make it clear to them that what you want to hear is just what's actually happening. That what you want to hear is what's actually happening. So the first step of designing a good survey, therefore, is, if necessary, and it's usually necessary, hire experts. Hire experts. Your firm is probably not going to have a world-class survey methodologist on staff. You're just not. You're just not. So hire experts if necessary. Where do you find those experts? Come talk to me. I will track them down for you. I will track them down for you. Once I'm tenured, I also may have the bandwidth to be that person. I'd be happy to do that for you. Until I'm tenured, I'm a little more worried about sort of making sure that I have enough publications and so on. But although, you know what? If you'd be interested in something that I could also then maybe publish with, please come talk to me. I would love that, because then I'll be really cheap. And I'm one of dozens of people on campus who know how to write a good survey. Sally Balbaki, frankly, is much better than I am. And I would go to, if you go to me, I'm gonna go to Sally, because I don't have a lot of contacts in Denver. I have some contacts in Silicon Valley, and I have a lot of contacts on the East Coast, because guess where I did my PhD? On the East Coast. So I actually am gonna go to Sally first and say, okay, who does this in Denver? By the time you ask me, I may know. But another reason to hire outsiders is because you don't want, so I was the advising lead. When I was the associate dean, I was the person who was the sort of liaison between the department advisors like Donald and Jones and Wendy Walker, between that team of advisors in the College of Business, and people like Stephanie Allen, who's the head of advising for the university, and the dean's office. I would be the voice of the advisors when I'd go into the dean's office. And so if the dean wanted to say, well, what do the advisors really think of their work? If I were to just go into a meeting with them and say, what do you really think of their work, right? There's one of two potential problems that's going to happen there. Either they're going to tell me what I want to hear, which is like, oh, we love it, just a few small things. Even if it's like actually a disaster, they're going to have a hard time telling someone in it who's even a quasi supervisor like I was, because they actually report to the chairs. They're going to have trouble being honest to a quasi supervisor or a supervisor, or even anybody even if I just said, okay, I'm going to send in Sally Balbaki. Right. Well, she's still, she works with Bill. Like, we know this, right? She's going to talk to Anne pretty directly. We know this. So we're only going to be able to feel like we can be so unvarnished with her, because, if nobody else is complaining and I'm the complainer, then maybe word gets back to Bill and back to Anne, the dean, or my chair, that like I'm the complainer, and I don't want that. Right. So I might not be too honest. Or on the other side, right, our advisors actually, they know that we can't, it's hard to replace a good advisor for what we pay an advisor. So they actually have some pretty good job security, and they've kind of figured that out by this point. And so cutting in the other direction, they could say, oh, well, now you're actually finally listening to feedback. I'm going to just dump on you like everything that I can think of, right, in the hopes that you will just fix all of this, right? When it's like, well, if we have somebody who come in as an external expert, right, and ask them questions sort of like, what are your problems, what's your highest, what are your highest priority problems, what's going well, et cetera, then speaking, if they know that they're speaking anonymously, that they're that was my next point. Anonymous collection, right? So the other reason to hire experts, which I've been hinting at here, is anonymous collection, because even if, again, I know how to design a survey, I know how to interview people, Sally knows how to design a survey, Sally knows how to interview people, but frankly, Anne does. Like, she's really rusty on it, I'm sure, but she'd figure it out. So but the reason you send in an outsider isn't just because of the expertise, but it's because that gives you the opportunity for anonymous collection. It's really important for a survey to only discuss one topic per question. You never want to have a topic you never want to have a question that is what's called double-barreled. avoid double-barreled questions. You know, so there's how do you feel about, so let's talk about the Rockies. Let's talk about the Rockies. Worst team in baseball, for those of you who've not paid attention. Definitely the worst team in baseball right now. Right. So if I were to ask you, how do you, you've opted into some sort of, through some means, I know that you're a baseball fan, right? And you live in Denver, right? How satisfied are you with the Rockies on-field performance, and how likely are you to go to a game? Those are very different questions. The Rockies are the worst team in baseball. And as soon as Denverites feel safe hanging out in public, they're going to go to Rockies games anyway. They really are. They really are. Right? The Rockies were one of the worst teams in baseball when they opened. And they opened in the old Mile High Stadium. For those of you who are new to Denver, you may not know this. Mile High Stadium, the old one, used to break apart, and the east stands used to roll. It was the biggest moving land-based piece of something in history, right? And so all three decks would just move far enough out that instead of being shaped like a football field, it would be shaped like a baseball field. And they had 50, 60, 70,000 people. Opening day, both years, 77,000, 78,000 people going to a baseball game. Those are attendance records that will never be broken, because nobody's ever going to run a major league team in a 75,000 seat stadium again, right? So it wasn't because we were good. It was because Denver had wanted a major league baseball team for decades, and we finally got one. It was really exciting. Everyone was gaga to go see the Rockies. So if you were to ask a question, how excited are you to go see the Rockies and root for them in a realistic expectation that they're going to win, would be a good example of a double-barreled question, right? And that would be a terrible question. You should never ask that question, right? How excited are you about the Rockies? Right? How much are you, how much attention are you paying? Even those aren't the same question. How much are you, how well do you think they are doing this year as a team? Are you interested in going to a game? And when going to a game, maybe which of these is the most is the reason that is most interesting to you for coming to get a game, and then maybe follow which of these is the second most interesting, right? So you would want to break up all those different questions into separate topics. So, how comfortable would you feel reporting on, how comfortable would you feel reporting on, the ethical violations at your company, and how important is that anonymity to you? Right? Very, not very. Ooh, whoa, no. That's a terrible question. Right? How important is anonymity to you? How comfortable are you in the belief that there is anonymity in this anonymous reporting system? Right? Those are separate questions. Ask them separately. You have to make sure that your question is also exceptionally clear to anybody. Anybody. Simonis.
Just regarding this, would you say that when designing questions, you really, really just want to stick to one descriptor per question? Is that a good rule of thumb to follow?
Typically, yeah. I clarify though. What do you mean by one descriptor per question?
Kind of what you're saying, like, are you interested or are you paying attention? Kind of like just one action or one adverb, one adjective, depending on each question, but kind of just like really focus on a single subject.
Yeah, exactly. And even above and beyond that, right? How can I make this as clear as possible to anybody, right? You might think, oh, well, we're an accounting firm. Everyone in the building is going to know what cost accounting means. Like, no, do not assume that, right? Oh, we're in a marketing firm. Everybody in the firm is going to know what digital strategies we're trying. Like, no, everyone is not going to know that. So everybody here is going to know what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. Like, no. So, so how inclusive is this office? By which, how inclusive do you feel this office is? That's a separate question from how inclusive do you feel this office is for you? But in both of those cases, I would unpack that. Right? So, like, how much do you feel like this office? How much do you feel safe to be yourself here at the office? That would be a really good, clear way to ask about inclusivity for you. Right. And then overall, how much do you think your peers and colleagues feel safe to be fully themselves at the office? And then that's how inclusive do you think the overall environment is? And so don't use jargon. Instead, just put the clearest possible definition of that jargon in instead and make that the question. No loaded questions? No loaded questions? Hey, Simonis, when did you stop cheating on your exams? Right? You see what I'm saying? Right? That assumes that, and obviously I have no reason to believe that Simonis has ever cheated on an exam. Fully above board, I'm 1,000% sure. But that assumes, right, that there has been cheating on exams, and so it's just when did you stop? So any loaded question is absolutely to be avoided. Absolutely to be avoided. So when there is theft at the office, how do you think management responds? Like, whoa, is there theft at the office? Like, let's start there, right? And then if there's theft at the office, how has management responded, right? And then you can do, so a lot of these, any modern survey design system, like a Qualtrics, even SurveyMonkey, which is cheaper, a little bit less aesthetically pleasing, a little less powerful, but still perfectly fine. You can build sort of like, is there theft at the office? Yes or no? If no, proceed. If yes, okay, how has management responded to theft at the office? Right. And then it's not a loaded question. Then you actually get the answer that would be to the assumed premise. And then you would follow up with what would be a loaded question if you hadn't clarified first. Revise, get everyone you can to look at this, run it by anybody that you have any sort of leverage to make, hey, my team, come look at this, look at what here is clear, what's not clear, are there loaded questions, is everything one topic per question, etc. Think about your time to complete and your response rates. Think about your time to complete and response rates. You want a survey to take about 10 minutes. 15 minutes, 20 minutes if you can. If it's an employee survey and you're paying them to complete the survey, then maybe you can get 30, 45 minutes out of them. If you're paying people to respond to surveys, maybe you can get them to complete 30 or 45 minutes if you're interviewing clients or something like that. You have to pay them a lot though, relative to what somebody emailed me twice. Like, we'll give you $15 to tell us about your digital learning platform. Like, no, I'm not giving you 30 minutes of my time for $15. Like, go to what? Like, no, thank you. And so think about this, the time to complete, complete, not compete. I'll fix that later. And response rates. And when you look at the results, think about which responses count. So if you say 80% of our employees strongly agree with, I feel fully capable, I feel fully safe bringing my full self to work. If 80% of people strongly agree with that, and 20% of the people disagree or strongly disagree with that, like, oh yay, we got 80%, like is not a good response. Like that's not a good thing, right? So just because a strong majority can push in one direction, like it's a lot of these questions, like you really want to think about, like, okay, like if we have even a substantial minority agreeing or disagreeing on this item, we got a problem. We got a problem. Okay. And then, so those are surveys. I'm going to very, very briefly in 2 minutes fly through semi-structured interviews, right? Again, you do want to hire outsiders because anonymity is crucial. A survey, if it's an anonymous survey, I mean, I would feel reasonably comfortable deploying a Qualtrics survey to undergrad students and just saying, here, just fill this out, and then not having you worry about whether your anonymous, response, or just tell you your responses are anonymous. Don't put your name in here. Right. And then you're going to feel pretty comfortable with that typically. Right. But when it comes to interviews, like I don't, if I work here, it's not anonymous. Right. So you have to hire outsiders. Anonymity is crucial for these. Make sure you script out your questions. You want to know, broadly speaking, sort of like this question goes to this one, it goes to this one. Have some follow-up questions ready, or at least think through about what potential follow-up questions are going to be. If they give this kind of answer, we're going to ask this follow-up. If this kind of question, we're going to ask this kind of follow-up. You want the reason you do interviews is to have open-ended questions, not leading. If you had close-ended questions, yes or no, strongly agree, strongly disagree on a scale of 1 to 7, unless that is a setup to why or unpack that for me or explain, right? There, you might as well just do a survey, because then you can get more people and get it a lot more efficiently and a lot more quickly. Leave time for follow-up questions, and leave time for follow-up questions you didn't even anticipate. Because interviews can go, I mean, like if your survey gives you 5 answers, okay, any of those 5 answers, great, fine. And then we move on, right? But interviews, you can say anything. Say anything. Okay, great. I was not ready for that. Let's follow. You're always going to need to do a subset of employees for interviews. That's just too time intensive. You can't have the whole company give you an hour of their time, right? And so how do you choose which employees you do? Do you randomize? Do you focus in on specifically like a subset? Like if there's been a huge compliance and ethics issue out of this division, okay, great. Well, we're going to do a bunch of interviews in this division as a follow-up project, that sort of thing. And then when you look at results, try to identify details and trends, right? You're going to have someone transcribe the interviews. They're really cheap online services. And then you're going to have someone go through the transcript and sort of look for details and trends. Again, outsider firms do this on the regular. It's not cheap, but it's something that is within the context of a broader company budget is typically pretty affordable for a medium to large size company. So. Well, that's what we have. We'll just do the instructions for this next time. It's pretty straightforward, but spoiler alert, you're going to be designing surveys and interview questions for employees that all based around ethics and compliance stuff. So we'll get there on Wednesday. And on that note, I bid you a good afternoon and get outside. It's beautiful.